Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you to the 22nd lecture of the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Let's have a quick recap on lecture 21 and then we go to the lecture 22. In the lecture 21 we discussed the different approaches to leadership, so that were ranging from the trait theories of leadership to the behavioral approaches to the contingency approaches, and then we discussed the inspirational approaches to leadership, which are also termed as the contemporary theories of leadership. So we started off with what the concept of the leadership, that what is leadership and how this concept of leadership can be distinguished from the concept of management, and whether the leaders can be managers, leaders can be good managers, or good managers can be leaders, or not good managers can be good leaders, and vice versa. So what makes a good leader, what makes a good manager, and what are the different trade-offs between the two, or what are the different combinations in which the two are possible, or whether they can two coexist or not, right, or whether they are mutually exclusive or not. So after discussing the concept of the leadership, and the differentiation between the leadership and management, we discussed the different trait theories of leadership, in which we discussed the oldest trait theory of leadership, which was given in 1960s, in which around 80 personality traits of the individuals, they were determined, and it was found, it was postulated in that theory that these traits, they can be the individuals who are depicting these traits can be leaders, and the individuals who do not have these traits, they cannot be leaders. But as we know that 80 traits, personality traits, that is a very, very exhaustive figure, and it's difficult to empirically judge, and it is difficult to scientifically analyze whether the assumptions of that theory and the validity of that theory. So the theory later, it did some research, and it conducted a number of studies in which very few evidence was found about the existence of these traits, or about the support for this theory. Very few researchers, around 3 to 5 researchers, they were found that showed that there are some factors, or there are some of the traits that are commonly existed in all those 3 to 5 studies that supported some of the evidences from this theory. But then a breakthrough in this theory was the personality trait model, Big 5 personality trait model, in which a number of 5 personality traits that was researched, and it was found that these traits, they can be helpful in determining the leaders. But the limitation of these theories is that they basically concentrate on the emergence of leaders, on by distinguishing between what traits are present in an individual and what are not. Basing on that, we can only distinguish between between who are leaders and who are non-leaders. So the ones who possess those Big 5 personality traits, they can emerge to be the leaders from the non-leaders. But whether they will be effective or not, this trait approach, it did not say much about that, right? So the contribution of this research was limited to the fact that it only distinguished the leaders from non-leaders, but not the effective from non-effective leaders, right? That was the limitation, that was a major limitation of this trait approach, right? And also these trait approaches, they also show that the leaders, they are born, right? So leadership is fixed and the leaders are born, and either you are born leader or you are not. So leadership, it cannot be learned through any trainings or skills, or through organizational factors, or through your situational factors. You cannot train yourself, or you cannot learn yourself how to be a leader or to demonstrate the leadership skills, because they are trait related characteristics. Therefore they are by birth. You inherit them or you don't inherit them. So this was the basic crux of the trait theories of leadership. Then we discussed the behavioral approaches to leadership, and we started off with the Ohio State University studies, which found that and the other study was the University of Michigan study. So these two approaches, they basically distinguished, if we grossly sum up these two approaches together, we would say that they distinguish between the task-oriented and or the production-oriented and the employee-oriented leaders or the relationship-oriented leaders. So the employee-oriented leaders, they basically focus on building good quality relationships with their employees or with their subordinates, and building an environment of trust, cohesiveness together with their subordinates, and listening to their feelings and being attached to them, showing them empathy, and so on. So these kind of leaders, they focus more on the relationships, and the task oriented leaders, they focus more on the completion of the task through following certain rules and policies and rewarding the employees and coercing them if they do or if they don't follow the tasks. So that is in the task oriented leadership, we discussed that leaders, they are focused more on the fulfillment of the task and how to get that task fulfilled and what will be the rewards and punishments if that task is not fulfilled within the deadlines, right? So these two approaches, they basically linked these two types of leaderships to the different outcomes, and they found that the Ohio State study found that the task-oriented leaders, they were more positively related to productivity, while the employee-oriented leaders were more positively related to the job commitment and satisfaction. While the University of Michigan studies found that employee-related or the employee-oriented leaders, they were they could gain better productivity, better performance, as well as job satisfaction and commitment from the employee. So they supported more the employee-oriented leadership style. But nevertheless, the Ohio State University studies, it supported that, or it recommended that these evidences, they are not conclusive, and more data needs to be collected to gain final conclusive evidences. And they suggested that it's not only one particular leadership style that is more effective, but the combination of the styles that may be used for the leaders to be more effective, right? So as per this approach, it considers the behavior, it uses the behavior of the leader to depict certain outcomes and to depict that what kind of behaviors that are effective and what are not effective. So this was the contribution of this approach, but one limitation of this research, or what these theories have been criticized for, is that they consider the leadership styles as fixed, right? So either you are task-oriented leader or you are relationship-oriented leader, right? And the contingency theories of leadership, which we discussed next, they basically those approaches, they basically introduced the situational factors into the relationship between the leadership styles and the different outcomes related to the subordinates and related to the organization. So that was the major contribution of these approaches, that they considered that there are the different leaders and the performance, the relationships, they are moderated through certain situational factors, right? So some of these leadership approaches, such as the Fielder's contingency model, it considered that the leadership style is fixed, but the situation changes, and but in different there can be different situations, and in those different situations the leadership and performance relationship, it can be different. So the situation moderates that relationship, and in order for this relationship between leadership style and the outcomes to be more positive, either you need to change the situation or you need to change the leader, because leadership style is fixed. Right, and we saw that how this approach calculates the leadership style by way of LPC, and then how it gives a number of different situations that make them favorable or unfavorable, such as the leader-member relationships, the task structure, and the formal power that the leader has. So the more of these three elements that there are in the situation, the most favorable the situation is, and then in the most favorable and the most unfavorable situations, how the fielder proposed that the leader should use the task-oriented relationship or the task-oriented leadership style, whereas when the situation is moderately favorable, the leader needs to be a relationship-oriented leader. But if there is a highly favorable or unfavorable situation, but the leader is not task-oriented leader, then there is a mismatch between the two, right? And what we need to do is that we need to either change the situation right, and we can change the situation by increasing or decreasing the structure, the formal structure in the job, or by increasing or decreasing the formal the power that the leader has, so that the situation can be moderately favorable, and then so that the situation can be highly favorable or unfavorable, and the leadership style matches with that situation. And the other option that we have is that we need to change the leader, right, because the leader cannot change his leadership style. The next theory that we discussed was the cognitive resource theory, which discussed that how the different leaders, they can be more effective or they can be less effective in different high stress or the low stress situations, right? And we discussed that how the intelligence is related to the performance in high stress situations, and how the experience of the leader is related to performance in high and low stress situations, right? Then we had a discussion on the Hersey and Blanchard situational leadership model. With it, basically the major contribution of this model is that also one, it discusses the situational factors, but then it also discusses the readiness of the follower, right? And this readiness of the follower, which is a combination of the ability and willingness of the follower. So this approach says that the leadership effectiveness is not only about the leader himself or about the leadership styles that he depicts, that it is not only those that influence the performance of the subordinates and their productivity and their satisfaction, but it also depends upon the subordinate effectiveness, about what kind of behaviors the subordinates depict, what are their expectations, what is their ability, and what is their willingness to take on or to do certain tasks, or to take certain orders, right? So it gave a combination of the ability and willingness, and a combination of different leadership styles that the leaders should depict, which are in line with the follower ability and willingness. So the degree of readiness of the followers, that should be matched with the different leadership styles, such as the directive leadership style, the participative leadership style, the supportive leadership style, etc. So they should be matched with the leader ability and the leader willingness, right? So this theory has its unique contributions as well. And then we studied the path goal theory, in which we saw that how the leaders, they need to set very clear goals, which should not be ambiguous, and which should be very clear, and which should be very ambitious goals for the employees or for their subordinates, and how under the different individual and the organizational factors, the leader needs to develop a combination of different leadership styles, taking in mind the different organizational factors and taking in mind the different personality factors that can influence the outcomes of the subordinate. Then we also saw a number of inspirational approaches to leadership, and we saw that we basically started off with this charismatic leadership, and we saw that how the charismatic leaders, they are basically how they are the visionary leaders. They are also termed as the visionary leaders, how they create the vision of the company, and then they inculcate that vision of the company into the individuals' minds. They motivate the individuals by way of doing certain things and certain acts themselves, and then they motivate the individuals in a way that the individuals, they rise above their self-interest, and they start aligning their personal goals with the organizational goals, and they are motivated enough to, they're intrinsically motivated to achieve the organizational goals, and they start identifying with the organizational goals. So these leaders, they are basically charismatic leaders in a way that their followers, they really idealize them and they like them, and they have this and these leaders, they basically go out of the box. They have the out of the box approach, the non-routine ways of doing things, right, and encouraging people to think out of the box, to come out of the box, to be creative and innovative and bring new ideas, and challenge the status quo, and challenge the existing assumptions, and bring in new ways of doing things, right? So and we also had a discussion on some of the key limitations of the charismatic leaders. Then we had a discussion on the transformational leaders, and we basically discussed these transformational, transactional, and laissez-faire leadership and management by we also had a discussion on management by exception, which is active and passive, and we saw that how all these basically leadership styles, they basically come under this full range leadership model that we discussed, and in which we saw that the most ineffective leaders are the ones who basically are the laissez-faire leaders who give an open and free hand, who have no concern for production, and they also have no concern for employees. So they are the leaders that are most ineffective, and they are basically just do what you want kind of strategy these leaders have. Whatever is happening, let it happen, and they give full discretion to the employees, and there is no check and balance, and they are termed as the most ineffective leaders, the laissez-faire style, right? So and then we had a discussion that management by exception, which is passive, that is a little better than the laissez-faire style. It is little less ineffective than the laissez-faire style of leadership, and therein what happens is that you are leading by bringing in checks and the corrective actions after the problem has occurred and after the loss has occurred. And then we saw that the leadership by exception, which is active, in which the leader is trying to continuously keep a track of where the problems are occurring and trying to solve them where they occur instantly, right? So that is a little better than this leadership by exception, which is passive. Then we discussed that the transactional leaders, they are basically effective leaders, that they basically use their rewards and the coercive structures, and they get their tasks done. They are this concern for the task being done. And finally, we discussed that how the transformational leaders, they are the most effective forms of leaders, because they basically also they have some characteristics of these charismatic leaders, or the charismatic leadership is basically a part of this transformational leadership. So the transformational leaders have all the characteristics of the charismatic leaders, but the transformational leadership is basically built on the transactional leadership. So then we discussed the ethical leadership, that when we say that the leader is ethical or he is behaving ethically, what are the different conditions for ethical leadership. Then we had a discussion on this online leadership, and we discussed that how why this online leadership, what are the different challenges of this online leadership, what are the different pitfalls of this online leadership. And lastly, we had a discussion on the concept of mentoring, that what are the different advantages of the mentoring, what are the duties and the responsibilities of the mentor, what the mentor is expected to do, and what the mentee can expect from the mentor when it comes to the career counseling and the other psychological counseling of the mentee. So these were the different leadership approaches and different leadership models that we discussed during our lecture 21. Let's now move to the lecture 22, which is on power, politics, policies, and organizational resources. This is again a very interesting topic, wherein we'll be discussing what is power, what is the contrast, or what is the differences between the leadership and power, what are the different bases of power. We'll be seeing that the dependency is a key to power. We'll see the different power tactics that can be used by the managers, and then we'll be seeing the factors that influence the choice and effectiveness of these power tactics. Then we'll be discussing the political behavior, what are the different determinants of political behavior, what are the different factors that influence or that determine the political behavior. Then we'll be discussing that what are the different outcomes of the political behavior. Then we'll be discussing the different organizational policies, the resource allocations, the objectives of the company, what are the trade-offs between those resource allocations, and what are the challenges for managers when it comes to making organizational policies, and when it comes to the resource allocations vis-a-vis the different departments in a company. A definition of power. Power is basically a capacity that A has to influence the behavior of B so that B acts in accordance with A's wishes. Right? So if A has power over B, so that B acts what A desires, that is power. right? And dependency is B's relationship to A when A possesses something that B requires. That is dependency, right? That how much dependent you are on the other, right? And what is the relationship between power and dependency? We see it in the next slide. Okay, so what is the difference between leadership and power? In our previous lecture, we had a discussion on the differences between a leader and a manager, and now we are seeing that what are the differences between the leadership and power. In our last slide, we saw that it is not important for a manager to be a manager. Of course, he needs to have certain formal authority, and he needs to have a certain position in the hierarchical level in the organization, and he needs to have certain power as well. But for the leader, he does not need to have the legitimate powers or the organizational powers or the formal authority in the organization, or he does not need to have a legitimacy in the organization to be a leader. That is what we discussed in our previous lectures. And similar kind of comparison also can be drawn here. Under the leadership, the leader basically focuses on goal achievement, whereas under power, it is used as a mean for achieving the goals, right? So leaders are the ones who try to motivate their workers for achieving certain goals. They themselves do the same, and they set a role model for their subordinates and motivate them to achieve certain goals, right? Whereas power, it is basically the use of your legitimate authority to get something done. Leadership basically requires goal compatibility with followers, whereas power requires follower dependency, right? So under the power, only A will have power over B if B desires something that A has, right? So if A, for example, has the reward power, for example, in a way that A can promote an employee, but B does not require that promotion. That is not one of the goals of B. So it means that B is not dependent on A, right? And if A withdraws his promotion, then it does not influence B, or it does not affect B. Then it means that A does not have power over B. That is the relationship between power and dependency, right? And we'll be discussing this relationship in detail further in our next slide. But here we see that this is how power, it requires the follower dependency, but no such dependency is required in leadership. In leadership, you only need to have a goal alignment. You need to have a compatibility with the goals of the individual and the organization. So what is it that the leaders do? They try to create this compatibility between the organizational goals and the personal goals. They need to make the individuals realize that their values, their motivations, and their goals, the organizational goal fulfillment will lead to their own goal fulfillment. They give these aspirations and these motivations, they inculcate them in their followers. And then the leadership focuses on the downward influence, whereas the power is used to gain lateral and upward influence as well. And different power tactics that are used to gain this lateral, downward, and upward influence, we'll be discussing them in our future slides. So here in the leadership, the research focuses on the leadership styles and relationships with the followers, whereas under the power postulate, the research focuses on the power tactics for gaining compliance, right? That how you have to gain the compliance, what tactics have you used, and how you have to gain the compliance. So the research focus is also entirely different in these two regimes, because both these regimes, they have their motivations, they have their goals different, their motivations different, their ways of getting things done different, and the way they operate, the mechanisms of the two types of the leadership style that you're using and the power tactic that you are using, they are basically entirely different regimes. Therefore, their research focuses are also different. Then we see that what are the different bases of power. Okay, we have the formal power sources, we have the coercive reward power sources, we have the legitimate power sources, and we have the expert power sources, and we have the referent power sources. So there are a number of number of different power sources that your manager he can have, right? Or so if formal power is when it is established by an individual's position in an organization, conveys the ability to coerce or reward from formal authority or from control of information. So you have the formal power, you have the formal authority to do certain things, you have the formal authority to give an reward or to coerce an employee, or you have a control over a certain amount of information in the organization, and that is your formal power. Coercive power is basically just it is a power base which is dependent on fear, right? So if you have the fear from your manager that if you don't do certain things, your manager will demote you, or your manager will suspend you, or your manager will penalize you. Your manager has this coercive power. He has this authority to punish you when you do not do certain things. So that is the coercive power. And the reward power is that if you comply with certain certain requests or certain orders of your manager, you will be given certain rewards. If you achieve certain outcome, you will be distributed certain awards, right? So reward power is the compliance achieved based on the ability to distribute rewards that others view as valuable. So that is really important here, that that should be viewed by others as valuable. The power source that you have, or the different combination of reward power that you have, they must be viewed as valuable by the subordinates. And I give its example as well in my previous discussion, that how if a certain outcome it is not valued by the subordinate, then he will not consider that as a power as well. Then the legitimate power, it is the power a person receives as a result of his or her position in the formal hierarchy of an organization, right? So it is that coming from a hierarchy in an organization, you have certain legitimate power. So we know that the top level manager or the CEO in the organization, he will be enjoying the greatest a huge number of legitimate power compared to the junior manager or the line manager. He will be having a lesser degree of this legitimate power because he's lower in the hierarchy compared to the middle level managers, and the middle level manager is lower in hierarchy compared to the top level manager. Okay, so there are a number of bases of power, that are the personal basis of power, right? And the one is the expert power, which is the influence based on special skills or knowledge. So as the definition indicates, that the expert power is basically based on how skillful an individual is, what is the learning level of that individual, and what is the knowledge repository that the individual has. The more knowledgeable you are, the more skillful you are at doing certain things, at doing your job in your profession, the more knowledgeable you are, the more expert power you have, right? And for having the expert power, of course, you do not need to be in a certain legitimate position or in high in hierarchy in an organization. Of course, you don't need to be having some certain formal power, because these are the personal power bases, right? So your co-worker maybe your co-worker has more expert power than your manager has. Then the referent power is basically the influence which is based on possession by an individual of desirable resources or personal traits. So certain individuals, they have certain kinds of characteristics that are really charismatic about them. So referent power is basically also related to this charismatic leaders, or the charismatic leaders, they have this this referent power. So they have this power that really attracts other people. There is something about those individuals that attracts the other people, and they try to kind of follow them, they try to kind of idealize them. They have certain personality traits, they have certain features in their personality which are really make the others to follow them and to listen to them and to be effective for them, right? So such as in the certain there are different actors. There are certain actors who are basically hired in the advertisements, or from whom certain advertisements are done, because we try to identify with those actors, such as a leading actor from the Hollywood industry. If he is he's coming in ad of a toothpaste, we will tend more to use that toothpaste compared to another person who is not a very renowned actor, if he is coming in the ad of another toothpaste, we won't be that much attracted towards that advertisement, and that advertisement won't be as effective for us as the advertisement that is in which our leading leader is playing the role, right? Or in which a leading leader is saying that I use this, and so I recommend you to use this as well. So that will be more effective for the people who admire that actor, right? Because they would also tend to be like that actor. So that will be that is the referent power. Okay, so I leave this cartoon for you to read. Then we have this the dependency we see from this is the key to power. If you are not dependent on the other person, then that person is not powerful for you, right? So dependency is the key. So let's see what the general dependency postulate says. It says that the greater B's dependency on A, the greater the power A has over B, right? So if B's dependency on A is greater, then A is really powerful over B. So possession, control of scarce organizational resources that others need make a manager powerful. For example, the manager, he basically plays the role of this disseminator of the information. Most of the acquisition of the company or of the unit which he is handling or the unit which he is managing, most of the information is coming to him, right? And then he basically is the disseminator of that information. So that makes the manager very much powerful as well, right? Because he is holding certain amount of information which is important for the company, right? And then he also, of course, has power. He also has a hold over the organizational resources, over the distribution of those organizational resources, which are basically scarce. So all these things and those resources, they are valued by the members of that organization or members of that unit. So those members, they basically are dependent on that manager for the distribution of those resources, and those resources are important to them, right? And therefore they perceive their manager as powerful. Then access to optional resources, for example, multiple suppliers, reduces the resource holder's power. Of course, if you are, as an organization, if you are taking the supplies from a supplier of your raw material, and this raw material and these supplies from the supplier, they're very specialized for your product or for your output, which are not available anywhere else in the market, and only that supplier has the specialization to produce those raw materials. Then it means that your dependency, you have a greater amount of dependency on your supplier, right? And your supplier in that case is very powerful, right? Because he can dictate his terms, right? He can if he withholds the supplies, right, then your operations, they can be majorly disrupted, and they can be majorly halted, right? Because you don't have any alternate sources of supplies available to you, and that supplier is really in dictating terms. He can charge you very exploitative prices as well. Right? So this is how this dependency postulate states that if you are dependent on someone else for something, then that someone else is powerful. So what creates this dependency? Importance of the resource to the organization, scarcity of the resource, and non-substitutability of the resource. So let's have a discussion on this postulate with that, using all these three different elements that create dependency, and let's get back to the example of the supplier that I just gave you, right? That we are considering a hypothetical situation in which a manufacturer is really heavily dependent on one single supplier for his for his raw materials, right? And we can take the example of a car manufacturer who for the different auto parts, he's dependent on a particular supplier, and those car parts, the supplier produces them in such a specialized way that they are not available elsewhere, and they have really long-term relationships of working together, and supplier is in a really monopolistic situation now, right? He's in a monopolistic position where he he has a greater hold over the supplies that he's giving to the manufacturer, right? So these raw materials, they are of course very important for this manufacturer, right? Because they are critical for the operation of the business, right? Without the raw materials, the operations cannot start, the productivity cannot start, right? So this raw material is really critical for the manufacturer that he gets from the supplier, right? So in this case, this is an important resource, and then it is scarce as well, as we saw that it is only that supplier who can provide this resource and no one else can provide that resource. So there is scarcity of that resource as well, which is increasing the importance of that supplier, which is increasing the dependency on that supplier because of it being scarce. If it was commonly available, if there were a number of other suppliers who were also available, then the importance of that supplier would have definitely significantly reduced, right? So then the manufacturer can easily turn to some other supplier for the same raw material as well. Although it is equally important for the manufacturer, but it is available with other suppliers as well. Therefore, the dependency on this supplier, of course, it reduces, right? Then the non-substitutability of the resource. So if the resource is substitutable, right, if that is available with only one supplier, right, that particular raw material, right, and that is critical for you as well, right, but that is substitutable, right, and you can use another kind of similar raw material as well. What would be the result? The dependency on that particular supplier will reduce, right? And that particular supplier then will not be that powerful, right? So if these three conditions are present, then it would. So if the raw material is very important for you, or if a particular resource is really important for you, that particular resource is scarce as well, and there is no substitute available for that particular resource, then your dependency on that particular resource will increase, and that increased dependency will lead to higher power. There are a number of power tactics that the manager or that an individual can use. So the power tactics are the ways in which individuals they translate the power bases into specific actions. The first one is the legitimacy. Legitimacy is that by way of your position, by way of your formal power, you are asking your subordinate to accomplish a certain request or to accomplish a certain order, because you have the formal power and you can ask the subordinate to do it, right? So you say that, okay, this is within my my limits, within my formal authority which has been given to you, and under that formal authority I ask you to do this task, right? So you are using this legitimacy, right? And you say that this is within the organizational policies and practices, so you need to do this or you need to accomplish this, right? So that is legitimacy. That is an influence tactic that you are using to get a certain thing done. Then there is rational persuasion. That is another influence tactic that can be used to get your work done, right? So rational persuasion, under rational persuasion, what happens is that you are basically trying to give logical reasoning to the subordinates to get certain things done, right? So you say to your subordinate that it is important for us to to collect data on this issue from a number of members in our organization or from our customers. We need to collect this data because this would lead us to this kind of results, or this would lead us to better shaping our product and so on, right? So you are giving particular reasoning, particular logic behind why you want to, why you are ordering or why you are asking your subordinate to do certain thing. You are giving a lot. You are convinced, trying to convince your or you are trying to order your subordinate by way of giving him a sound logic or sound reasoning, right? You are backing your argument with a reasoning and logic, right? And you are trying to persuade him by that way. Then the inspirational appeals, they are basically, inspirational appeals are when you are trying to motivate your subordinates, right? And that, okay, if you get this done, or for this goal achievement or this something, it can also enhance your own personal goals, and it can enhance to your personal values as well, right? So you're trying to emotionally engage the your subordinate, you're trying to motivate the subordinate and emotionally commit the subordinate towards doing a certain activity, and by saying that, it would also be identifying with your personal values and personal goals. Then under consultation, what happens is that you are basically trying to consult you're consulting your subordinates, right? Okay, that this is the problem, and how do you think we should go about it? We have this ways, and we should use this tactic, or we should use this approach. So you are basically, it is more participatory in nature, right? You are consulting with your subordinate before saying that, okay, we should do this and we should follow this. Then in exchange, you basically ask your subordinate that, okay, if you do this, I will give you this type of reward, or if you do this, I will give you this type of reward, right? So this is exchange, that do certain behavior, and that would be exchanged with a certain favor from the manager. Then we have the personal appeals. The personal appeals, what happens is that you are basically using your personal relationships with your subordinate. You are on personal grounds, you request the subordinate to do a certain thing. So that is, you are not at all using your legitimate authority, you are not using your legitimate power, and you are not asking the subordinate, but you have certain personal relationships with your subordinate, or you are on the personal grounds, you are requesting the subordinate to do something, right? And then in gratification, in which what happens is that you are using the flattery tactics, right? You are praising your subordinate, you are flattering him for getting the work done, or for accomplishing a certain task through the subordinate. You are saying that, okay, I know you can do it, you have the potential to do it, you previously did very well, and you can follow this as well, and you can accomplish this as well. So and no one can do better than you, and things like that, right? So that is in gratification. And then you can also use the pressure tactic, in which you are you're kind of coercing the employee that if you don't do this, this will be the consequences. You are just pressurizing the subordinates. And the coalitions, in which sometimes the managers, they form these coalitions, in which a number of other people, they are gathered together, and you form a kind of a group, and then you, for achieving the objectives and getting things done from others, right? And that basically strengthens you. So we'll talk more about coalitions in our upcoming slides. Okay, and the research shows that these different number of influence tactics, or the number of power tactics that we just discussed in our previous slides, they basically they have different levels of effectiveness when it comes to upward influence, when it comes to downward influence, and when it comes to the lateral influence, right? When it is the upward influence, then which means that if a manager has to talk with his boss, or if a manager has to communicate with his boss, then he needs if he uses this rational persuasion, or the use of rational persuasion is influential, right? And if you are in your downward influence, like if you have to communicate, or if you have to pass an order, or you have to get something done from your subordinates, then inspirational appeals, the consultation, and the rational persuasion, they are found to be most effective, right? And these kinds of tactics, or these kinds of power influence tactics, they have been reported to be more effective, and they have been reported to gain better employee satisfaction and better commitment from the employees compared to the other downward influence tactics, such as the pressure and exchange and legitimacy. They are not being supported as very effective tactics when it comes to the downward influence. But of course, these tactics can be used for downward influence, right? And pressure, in most of the instances, it has been reported to backfire even, right? When you get something done by pressurizing your subordinate, then that backfires in most of the time, right? And then in the lateral influence, you again there are a number of tactics that the manager can use, but the most effective tactics in the lateral influence, they have been reported to be the personal appeals and the collations, right? Because and then we can see that why in the upward influence, of course, in the upward influence we cannot use this pressure tactic, or we cannot use this legitimacy or exchange tactics, where they won't be that effective. And under the downward influence, so there are different power tactics. The managers, they need to understand that what are the different influencing tactics that can be more effective when in their dealings, in their upward communication, in their downward communication, and in their lateral communication, which kinds of power tactics they are more effective. Then the research also shows that it is a combination of hard and soft tactics that works better, right? So for example, in your downward communication or in your downward influence, if you use this legitimacy, and which is a hard power tactic, wherein you are saying that, okay, I am in this authority, I have this formal power, and to get this thing done, right? And this is also in line with the organizational policies and rules and regulations, therefore you should do it, right? So that is the legitimate way of getting things done, right? But that is a hard tactic in which the subordinate may feel that he is being dictated by the by supervisor, or his supervisor is very bossy, right? So that can be combined with the soft tactic as well, which is for instance, which is exchange, or it is ingratitude, in which you also try to flatter your subordinate that I know you can do it very well, and you have been best at doing it, and so on, right? So if you then if you use this ingratitude along with the legitimacy, then this ingratitude will basically wipe out the effect of this legitimate order that has been, or legitimate power tactic that has been used by the manager, right? So the subordinate will not feel that he has been really bossed on by the manager, right? If this ingratitude technique is also used in combination with that hard tactic. Then the pressure tactics, as I explained to you, they tend to backfire, and the manager therefore needs to be very careful in the choice of their power tactics when it comes to their dealings at these different levels across the organization. Okay, then the sequencing of tactics is again it is important, right? You should try to start off with the softer tactics, and then you should move to the harder tactics, right? So you just the softer tactics, they can be, as I discussed earlier, the ingratitude, that is a softer tactic, right? And then exchange, and you can say that this participation of the employee, right? They are all the softer tactics, and then they range to the higher tactics, which are the legitimacy and the rational persuasion, etc. They are and the pressure. They are the harder tactics. Of course, as I told you, that you should have the ability, you should have the skill to use the tactics, in what combination you have to use them, where you have to use which tactic, and whether you have to use a soft or a hard tactic. Then the relative power of the tactic users, such as some tactics work better when applied downward or upward. We discussed this. Then the type of the request attaching to the tactic. Is the request legitimate? That is really important, that what you want to get done, is it a legitimate thing that you want to get done or not, right? And if it is a legitimate thing, because then you need to use different tactics, and the managers who all tend to engage in the illegitimate things, they tend to engage in different power tactics. Then how the request is perceived, is the request consistent with the target's values or not? If it is not consistent, then what tactics you need to use, and if it is, then what tactics you need to use, because the subordinate is going to take an order differently when it is in line with his own values and aspirations, and compared to when it is not, right? And then the culture of the organization is very important. Culture affects the user's choice of tactic. For example, is it a very risk-taking culture? Is it a very stable organizational culture? Is it a very warm culture, or it is a very formal culture, right? And under very formal cultures, for example, the subordinates, or it might be novel for the supervisors and the subordinates to use this rational persuasion and the legitimacy tactic compared to the warm and the collectivistic cultures, for example, where the employees, they really value the good quality relationship with their supervisors, and this consultation and inspirational appeals, etc., they might be important, right? So the cultural differences under the individualistic and the cultural differences under the collectivistic cultures, they can be important, so determinant of what power tactics should the managers use under the different organization and under the different situations, in the different countries, and according to the different cultural differences of the different countries, they should need to use different power tactics, right? So for example, this participation kind of thing and the consultation that employees in the France, they do not expect, because the nature of organizations is really bureaucratic. Things are very much defined, and everything is very formal. Structures are extremely formal, so the subordinates do not expect this participation or the consultation of the subordinates with the managers, right? And they may have this feeling, if the manager consults with the subordinates under such conditions, the subordinates may feel that the manager is inept or is incapable to make a decision, and that is why he is consulting them, because that is not the culture there. And then we discussed about these country-specific cultural differences, right? So coalitions, as I told you, it is one of the power tactic that is used by the managers. It is a cluster of individuals who temporarily come together to achieve a specific purpose. So they seek to maximize their size to attain influence. They seek a broad and diverse constituency for support of their objectives. Occur more frequently in organizations with higher task and resource interdependencies, and occur more frequently if tasks are standardized and routine. They are the different characteristics of where the coalitions occur. Okay, so what is political behavior? Political behavior are, we know that in organizational life, organizational politics has a very important role to play, right? And organizational politics are everywhere, because wherever there is interaction between the two human beings or more than two human beings, politics is expected to be there, right? And organizations are no exceptions, right? When there are dealings between the different employees, between the different managers at the different levels, they have their own vested interests, and they are trying to safeguard their own vested interests, right? And as a result, they enter into the politics, right? And because the organizational resources, they are limited, right? And the managers, in order to satisfy their preferences, their priorities, or their own interests, they try to gain more of those different resources, more of those, for example, the profits or the increments from the limited money pool, right? And they try to gain more promotions, and they try to gain other opportunities more and more. So every manager is trying to safeguard his interest, and every manager is trying to get the maximum share from the organizational pool of resources. And that is why the politics, they begin in the organization. So what happens is that a political behavior is basically not a task behavior, right? It is not your part of your job assignment, or it is not part of your job description, but it is something other than that. So activities that are not required as part of one's formal role in the organization, but that influence or attempt to influence the distribution of advantages or disadvantages within the organization. Advantages from the organization, or in order to avoid certain disadvantages from the organization, you enter into this kind of behavior. So then this political behavior is also of two types. One is the legitimate political behavior, and other one is the illegitimate political behavior. Legitimate political behavior is the one which is very normal in the lives of the organizations. Normal political behavior, such as you are bypassing a chain of command for some political motives, right? And you're not going to your direct supervisor, but you're going to your manager, right? And then you have certain you want to gain access to certain resources. You're complaining to your supervisor about your co-worker, for example, or about certain other conditions about the resources that you have compared to that your co-worker has, and you want to gain more access to those resources, etc. So that these are all little small political behaviors that keep on occurring in everyday working or everyday routine of the organization. So and then you're for instance engaging into the networking, especially if you are engaging into networking with external community, with external professional community, in order to gain certain political advantages and to playing very astute. Then the illegitimate political behaviors, they are the basically extreme political behaviors. They violate the implied rules of the game, such as you enter into whistleblowing, you enter into illegal strikes, right, that are out of the contract, you're wearing orthodox dress, etc. They are basically extreme political behaviors, and they are the unwanted and undesired political behaviors that are basically violating the rules of the game. Okay, now this is also politics. It can also be stated that politics lies in the eyes of the behavior, in the eyes of the beholder. Just as we say that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder, so it could also be stated that politics lies in the eyes of the beholder. Why? Because politics, the definition of politics, how we define politics, what we term as a political behavior, it may not be termed as a political behavior by you, right? So you may label something as effective management, what I am labeling as political, right? So if I give you a few examples here, it would be labeled if it is labeled as blaming others is labeled as political by one individual, but by another individual it may only be seen as fixing responsibility, right? And one person may be viewing the whistleblowing as political, right, and other may be viewing it as an effective as an effective management strategy to improve the efficiency. One might be viewing being ambitious as political, while the other might be viewing it as career-minded, right? One might be viewing opportunistic, and the other one might be under the effective management perceptions. They might be viewing it as astute. So the different people, they can have different different perceptions of certain behaviors, and they can term them as differently compared to what vis-a-vis what they perceive them. If they perceive them as political, so if I perceive certain action of an individual as political, I would say that it is whistleblowing, and if another individual may label that particular action as only a way of improving the efficiency of the organization, right? So this is how the perceptions of the different individuals can be different about certain behaviors, and they can label them according to their perceptions, right? So one person may perceive some behavior as arrogant, while the other may perceive it as confident. One might be viewing it as perfectionist, the other attentive to detail. So there are different factors that influence these political behaviors. In the individual, there are a number of individual factors, and there are organizational factors. So under the individual factors, the individuals who are the self-monitors, which I explained to you earlier, self-monitors are the people who basically they tend to they are very sensitive to the social situations, to the environmental cues, and they behave and they respond very quickly and very efficiently to those environmental cues, and thus the changes in the situations, they respond by changing themselves according to the need of the situations, right? They are the high self-monitor. So these people, they tend to engage more in the political behavior. Then the individuals who have internal locus of control, who feel that they have the power, they are basically controlling their external environment. So those individuals, again, they have high political behavior, those who have high internal locus of control. High Mac personality, we know that high Mac personality, these are the people who tend to manipulate the different situations, right? And those who have this manipulating characteristic in their personality, they are also tend to engage more in the political behaviors. Then if the individual perceives that he has a lot invested in the organization and he expects a lot of benefits from the organization, then he will tend to engage less in the illegitimate political behavior, right? And if the individual has more job alternatives, he has a number of different options in the external market and is very highly employable, then that individual will tend to engage more in the illegitimate political behavior within the organization. And if you have better expectations of success, that if you will engage in a certain political behavior, and that will also lead you to success. If you have higher perceptions of success by engaging in a political behavior, then you will actually tend to engage in that political behavior. But if you perceive that it's not going to work, then you will tend not to engage in that political behavior. Then there are a number of organizational factors as well that determine this, such as the reallocation of resources. If there's been this reallocation of resources in the organization, then everyone will try to gain more and more pie of the share, more and more of the resources, and they will engage more in the political behavior. Then if there are more promotion opportunities in the organization, then again everyone would try to get that promotion, right? And because the promotion opportunities, of course, they are limited, not everyone can get promotion, a limited number of people can get promotions, and then again it will be a motivator for them to engage in the political behaviors to gain those promotion opportunities. Then if you have low trust, if there is low trust in the organization and their roles are very ambiguous, there is not clarity in the organization, then there are chances that you will engage more in the political behaviors. If the performance evaluations are very subjective, right, they are not clear, you don't know against what you are being evaluated, the organization does not have a standard performance evaluation procedure, it is very subjective, right, then again you will try to engage in political behaviors such as approaching the seniors or trying to build some political and astute relationships with your seniors or with your managers who are going to make the evaluation so that you can get more positive evaluations. Then the zero-sum reward practices, the organizations in which there are these practices, that is one, that is, for example, if there is a total of we know that one person will gain something on the expense of the other person, then of course those two people are going to engage in the political behavior because they know everyone knows that he will be gaining or the other one will be gaining on his expense, right? So the tendency to engage in the political behavior then is going to be higher. Then the democratic decision making, again, if there is democratic decision making, the tendency to engage in the political behavior is again going to be higher. If the performance pressures are more, again you will engage more in the political behaviors, and if there are self-serving senior managers are there, they again going to engage in the political behavior. So the level of political behavior being high or low, it depends upon the different combinations of these organizational and the individual factors, right? Then of course the employee responses to organizational politics. There are certain individuals who do not take part in these organizational politics, right? And for those individuals, the results of organizational politics, because they don't take part in the organizational politics because either they are not politically that astute, they're not that skilled politically, or they just want to refrain from this organizational politics, come do your work and go back. For this kind of situation, because they feel that the resources, the organizational resources, or the people are playing politics to their disadvantage, and that they don't have much control over the situation, and that they don't want to enter into politics, they don't want to play this kind of games, right? And they feel that they are being cut out from the organizational benefits and the organizational advantages on different arenas. For those people, they as a result experience decreased job satisfaction, they are reported to be more stressed at their work, and they are reported to increase their turnover, because when they feel that there is a lot of politics in the organization and they cannot be a part of it as well, but then they also feel that it is being to their disadvantage. Of course they are going to be stressed out, they're going to be dissatisfied, and they're going to have higher intentions to quit, and they will be showing more turnover as well and more reduced performance. And we also need to understand that this relationship is moderated by the understanding. The people who have a very good understanding of how the things are working, who are the decision makers, why are they making certain decisions. For them, this relationship tends to be weaker than for the people who have low understanding of how and why things are happening. For them, there's political behaviors, and the perceptions of these political behaviors are going to more negatively affect these different outcomes, the persons who have low understanding. Then these people, they tend to engage in defensive behaviors. The people who are non-political, they by a number of actions that they do, such as they're avoiding actions, avoiding blame, and avoiding change. Impression management is a way, it is a process by which individuals attempt to control the impression others form of them. And there are a number of techniques, such as to use this impression management, right? Such as the conformity, that if you go to your boss and you say that, sir, I totally second your opinion, you're very right, we should have done like this. And then excuses, you say, you go to your boss and you say that, sir, I could not publish this advertisement and in this Sunday's newspaper, but we know that it hardly works. People hardly respond to such advertisements. Then you can use the apologies, such as, I could not do it, I'm sorry for this. Then the self-promotion, you can use this as an impression management technique, self-promotion, in which you say to your boss, for example, that you gave the same task to my other co-worker, and he could not do it, but I did it in 2 weeks. Then you can use the flattery. You're trying to flatter your boss, that, oh, you have done it very right, the way you do it, no one else could do it. Favors, you say to your customer, I have these 2 tickets to this movie show in the evening, and you can just have these in lieu of or as a return to our good discussion that we had now, right? So you're granting the favor. Then the association, right? You're in an interview, you're saying to the interviewer that, oh, your dad, I have been college roommate with your dad, right? You're trying to build an association by some way with the interviewer, and by that way you are trying to create your positive impression in the way of the eyes of the interviewer. So these are the different techniques which you can use to control the impression others form of you. Okay. Then, of course, there are a number of factors that determine if the behavior is politically ethical or not, compared to what is we judge it, and there are 3 different indicators that against which we can judge it. What is the utility of engaging in that behavior? Does the utility balance out any harm done by the action, and how it is perceived as equitable or just or fair? I have a number of questions for you that you should try to answer yourself, and then of course there are a number of management issues that the management faces, and we discussed that in the form of the annual objectives that they have to set. They are the policies, resources, organizational structure, restructuring, resistance to change, operations, and human resources, right? So let's have a discussion on a few of these here, that how the annual objectives, we know that the managers, they formulate these annual objectives in line with the strategies of the organization, right? And these objectives at the business unit level, for example, they need to be lined up with each other. There need to be horizontal consistency between these objectives. So if there are different departments, if the overall organizational objective or the overall organizational objective is to increase the sales by 50,000 in 1 month, right? And then it means that it has all the departments in the organization, they need to set their objectives which support each other. So of course it would mean that the operations department, it needs to produce certain amount of output worth 50,000 more. So they should make their objectives accordingly. The marketing department needs to make its objectives accordingly. Maybe it needs to increase its advertisements, or it needs to hire more salespeople, etc. Right? So there should be consistency between the objectives. The overall objective objectives that you set and the departmental objectives that are set, they should be consistent with each other. And the vertical consistency of objectives is very important. If you have some long-term plans and the long-term objectives which are to meet your strategy, and your annual objectives, they should match that vertically with the organizational strategy at large, or at the corporate level, at the higher level, right? Your strategy at the department level or at a lower level, that should match with that. Your objectives, they should be in line with those. Okay, we know that these objectives, they should be quantifiable, they should be quality objectives. So it's not that you're increasing your sales by 50,000 but the quality of that sales or the quality of your product has declined. Then in terms of cost and time, you also need to see that what is the cost of the following those objectives, and in terms of time. We know that organizations, they set policies to achieve those objectives. They give us standards, they set boundaries for the managers, they set constraints, and they set limits. So they are also helpful in easier and quick decision making by the managers, right? And in the form of policy manuals, for example, it is helpful for the managers to standardize certain decisions and to act in certain ways. There are examples of the policies. They can be to offer extensive or limited management development workshops and seminars, to centralize or decentralize employee training activities, to recruit through employment agencies, college campuses, and on newspapers. So every organization has its own policy. Now, how it has to make its recruitments. Will it be online? Will the recruitments will be through newspapers? Will they be through employment agencies? So these are all the different policy initiatives, and these are all the different policies that the different organizations, they can have for themselves, right? What is the level of inventory? Some organizations may keep a high level of inventory as per their policies, some keep a low level of inventory as per their policies. And of course, the policies, it means that they are different for different companies. For example, 40% of the companies, they have no policies on net surfing, right? So of course, you cannot standardize the policies. Every organization makes its policies according to its objectives that it wants to achieve. So the policies, they are made to fulfill the organization, to help accomplish the organizational objectives, right? Some organizations have the smoking policy and some don't have this smoking policy, right? So we know that there are some financial resources that organization has. There are physical, human, and technological resources that the organization has, and then there is a trade-off that has to be made in the organizations when it comes to the allocation of these different resources that the organization has. For example, whether the organization has to enter into market development or it has to enter into penetration, whether it has to acquire externally or it has to insource, or it has to outsource. It has to have, what is the number of contractual employees that it needs to have vis-a-vis the permanent employees it needs to have. Of course, it cannot follow, for example, it might be difficult for the organization to follow the market development as well as penetration strategy at the same time because of the limited allocation of these resources. So it has to make trade-off decisions, right, between these different choices, and that is where the conflict between the managers that can also arise when it comes to the trade-off decisions. One manager might be favoring the market development and the other one might be favoring the penetration. So in one of our next lectures, when we discuss the conflict management, how conflict occurs, what are the different conflict negotiation strategies, then we'll be discussing more of these trade-off decisions in detail. So with this, we come to an end of today's lecture, wherein we discussed the different power tactics and the different influencing tactics and how the political behavior arises in the organization, what are the different outcomes of that political behavior, and then we also had a discussion on what are the policies that the organizational managers make, the challenges that they have. We had a small discussion on that as well, and what are the different trade-off decisions that the managers make, how policies help you achieve your objectives, etc. So thank you very much for today. Let's have a break up till next time. Thank you very much.